Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information. The Trogly's Guitar Show. Man, do we have a fun one today. There's only one time in history that something like this could exist from Gibson, and that's 1985. Yeah, you can find some of these in 1986 as well. But this is what is known as the Gibson Explorer XPL. And this thing was birthed in a very confusing time in Gibson history, which I'm going to call the transition era. Because you were going from being owned by Norlin to the Juskowitz era. And they just kind of had a heck of a time trying to find something that would be marketable because, you know, super strats were in, freaky pointy guitars were in. It wasn't necessarily about Les Pauls and SGs and things like that at this time. So Gibson tried their hand at a bunch of different stuff. But it really wasn't until Slash came along, kind of saved the company, and the Les Paul Classic starting in 1989, then the Custom Shop in 93 with proper reissues, kind of, you know, brought the company back to the limelight. But during this freaky time is also when the prehistoric reissues came out. So I guess you could say the mid-80s wasn't that bad, looking back on it today. But I kind of consider this era the Wild West of Gibson history because there's not a lot of documentation. Most people don't even care about these things. But I do. I want to document each and every single one of them because there's some freaky stuff. Obviously, the poster child from this era are the 1983-84 stripped down Flying V's and Explorers that Metallica made popular among a bunch of other bands. But then there's these guys that we're going to talk about today, the XPL guitars. Now, I used to think XPL stood for Explorer. It was just kind of shortened down because everything that has that title is a regular guitar, but with an Explorer headstock on it. So you've got things like the Spirit XPL, the Flying V XPL, various double cut Les Pauls in humbucker, and HSS formats. Even some traditional Les Paul XPLs. There's a really cool one floating out there that I think was a custom order or a NAMM show, something. It's a triple humbucker white with a raised Gibson logo. How cool is that thing? I would love to find that guitar. And perhaps the most notable of the XPL series is the custom ordered Aldo Nova model. That guy ordered 12 of those. It's basically a Les Paul with an Explorer headstock, but in a reissue style format. And it's a rumor that Rick Nielsen owns most of those yet today. But then there's this guy, the Explorer XPL, the one that just doesn't make any sense because it's an Explorer. How can you give an Explorer an Explorer headstock and call it different? They didn't. They gave it the Gibson hockey stick headstock. Now, this is something that Gibson used kind of in the mid to late 80s on a series of basses, as well as guitars called the Q Series. There's not much information out there about those. I've had a few Q80 basses, a Q90, but it's kind of like an Explorer except more bulky and pointy. But they call it a hockey stick because, you know, it's even closer to a hockey stick than a regular Explorer headstock. And on top of that, if you didn't notice, they changed the body. So let's go ahead and compare this one to a regular styled Explorer body to really see the differences here. Well, apparently all I have is this Lizzie Hale model, so it's not necessarily a regular Explorer, but I think you guys get the idea. So here we go, headstock-wise. As I was talking about, it's much more pointy at the top. It's not rounded off. Besides that, surprisingly, these aren't all that different, but it's such a drastic look, going from this to this. Most Explorers will have rosewood fretboards like this one, but the XPL series actually got ebony with dot inlays, which is normally found on Explorers. This one's a bit special with the custom block inlays. Another feature that I didn't even realize, these have maple necks. This is like the only Explorer that I can think of that came stock with a maple neck. Now sure, you've got the E2s that have that maple walnut maple sandwich, but those things were a little bit different from a regular Explorer anyways. But now take a look at the body. It comes to a point. That's what the 80s was about, pointy guitars. So that's what they did. They made them pointy instead of rounded off. And you see how it comes more to a drastic point right here instead of just kind of sloping in? Then it does the same thing down here. A super pointy bit, rounded edge. But here's the big difference. There's this extra cutaway right here. I had a commenter joke that XPL stood for extra place for leg because you could put it on your leg when you're playing. But then it just kind of continues on like a regular Explorer, you know, more pointy in more areas. It comes in further than a regular Explorer right here. Then it kind of makes more of a point right there. I mean, it's kind of just a freaky Explorer, and it's a little bit smaller as well. So I guess you could kind of compare this to that other freaky Explorer that we talked about, the E90. Other than that, notice there's no pick guard on these guys, whereas regular Explorers do. They have the 2-knob layout with the 3-way toggle switch and an output jack all inlaid on the front, versus traditional Explorers just having 3 knobs on the front and then a side output jack. And another big thing is the factory stock pickups in here. Generally, in this era, like a reissue styled Explorer would come with Tim Shaw PAFs. These guys come with really hot Dirty Fingers pickups. These were a really hot ceramic pickup that will just really overdrive your amp, which was what was in at the time. They ohm out at about 16k ohms a piece. And those are really easy to identify from Gibson because they have the double row of pull pieces that are adjustable. Another thing is these guys are always marked with a custom shop edition decal. That just simply means it was a limited edition of some sort. They were still made on the same production line. It wasn't a separate custom shop at that point in time. A lot of people get confused as to what that actually means. But you can find these guys in a few different colors, white ones, black ones, and then there's a Cherry Sunburst version, which is kind of really cool because it takes some elements of the CMT models and it gives it a curly maple top. Also then put binding on it, so it makes it look a little bit fancier. And a lot of those will have double cream Dirty Fingers. So that really just kind of encapsulate the whole Kiss look a little bit, kind of, you know, channeling off the vibes of his Custom. And on top of that, I think it makes the guitar look more like a Dean, because that's kind of what some of the higher end Deans looked like at that point in time. And the biggest thing about the XPL guitars is you can find them in 2 different formats. There's the common Kahlered out version, because I mean, if you're wanting one of these guitars, you're probably gonna want a wang bar on it. But, you know, for the collectors out there, they're usually seeking out the stop bar models because they're so rare. If you want to know why it takes me a long time to find these things to review, is because I will only buy the stop bar tailpiece because I think they're extra special. That's the way I prefer my Gibsons to be set up. But it takes a long time to find one that's clean enough for me to review or close enough to be restored, and that's not priced to the moon. So to learn a little bit more about this guy, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench and take a look at its individual parts. Okay, let's dive into this freaky thing. So the stock pickups are now back into this guitar in a roundabout way. If you remember during my unboxing segment, I kind of got upset with the seller because he said the original Dirty Fingers were included, but it turned out that it was just one original Dirty Fingers, which was the bridge pickup, so I had to go out and source another era correct one. And when I got this pickup in, I instantly became saddened because the lead was cut very short on this, and I thought I just had to get it to the volume pot, but it turns out that it goes to the 3-way toggle switch in this situation, so it was going to be too short. So I was like, oh man, I went through all that trouble to get this pickup, and I'm not even going to be able to do it. But then when I looked inside here, I had saw what they actually originally did is they left the original wiring in here alone, and they just cut the leads of the original pickups. So what I've done is I've just spliced them back in here. So if somebody were to just look in the back control plate, they would say, oh yeah, that's a completely original guitar. But no, the secret hides here. So in order to do that, just in case you're curious, is I just stripped back the outer wiring of this, then I twisted those together, I soldered them together, and then I kind of soldered them together again to make sure I had a good grounding connection. And I pretty much did the exact same thing with the inner wire. I made sure that they were nice and bare, and then I twisted those 2 together, soldered them, and then I went through and did the electrical tape thing. I just didn't have any shrink tubing, or else I would have done that. But after about an hour or so, I finally figured that out, and it works flawlessly. So the neck pickup has quite a long lead to it, but that splicing job is hidden like right in here. Now this neck pickup I was told came from an 83 Flying V, so it's slightly earlier than this guitar and doesn't have the date stamp, whereas the bridge pickup does have the correct one. So 403, then 385. What you're looking for is that 85 that tells you it was made in 1985. Now that that's all out of the way, this looks like mahogany to me. I know sometimes you'll find like alder-bodied Explorers in this era, and this is your neck tenon, and then here's what your bridge pickup cavity looks like. Nothing too much going on here. I am questioning the originality of the pickup rings. They look super old, but they might not actually be correct. And now here's the reason why I particularly like the stop bar versions of these as opposed to the Kahler versions. The stop bar ones, they actually get stock Gibson ABR1 bridges. And these things on their own will sell more than a complete Kahler unit if you're going to part this thing out. But it's just so funky that a freaky guitar like this would not just get a Nashville style bridge. They actually went all the way to give it a 50 spec bridge. It's just kind of funny. I do want to note that the posts seem to be leaning back a little bit. The tailpiece, it's possible this has been replaced. I'm going to go ahead and say it is, just to lean on the side of caution, but it looks close, but not quite. So we'll take another quick look at this rather jagged body. It's kind of interesting and meets at more of a point. Then you got that extra place for leg. I'll never forget that explanation. Thanks for that one, man. And then these things are super pointy. So with all pointy guitars, you usually get some wear around the outer edges. Now these are a master volume, master tone setup with a 3-way toggle switch and an output jack all on the front. These knobs have definitely been replaced. Depending on your finish, a black one would have had something that looked like this, but black with white lettering, whereas the Cherry Sunburst ones would have these style. And a beautifully dark ebony fretboard. Now, I really like the dot inlays on this. I think dot inlays look best when it's a real mother of pearl, and usually I like binding with them, but I'll let this example slide because it's so freaky anyways. And now our goofy 80s headstock. Truss rod's in good shape, your thread's just slightly past the end of the nut. Then you have 6-in-line tuners with the Gibson silkscreen logo. That would have been cool if these had mother of pearl though. And the truss rod cover is just blank. Now for whatever reason, I can't get a reading within this circuit. Sometimes that'll happen. But when I had these pickups out, this one was like just slightly under 16K and this one was about 16.5. I get a 1.69 inch nut width, which increases to 2.05 at the 12th. First fret neck depth, 0.82 and 0.99 by the 12th. And the traditional 24 3/4 inch scale length. You can see somebody had this bridge on backwards at one point in time, so the saddles kind of have uneven wear. I guess you could just play Hapatui with them, but the spacing seems just slightly extreme on the top 2 strings. So you can definitely play it as is, but I mean, if you're very particular with your setups, you might consider new saddles. As far as the action goes, it is set up ridiculously low. It was to the point when I straightened out the neck completely that you couldn't actually get the 2nd fret to ring on the E string. So I just backed it off a hair. I mean, most people would still call this a straight neck, but that made this pretty much play effortlessly. You get a little bit of fret buzz in that like 7 to 12 register, but nothing that amplifies. I mean, I think this is a shredder's guitar at this point with this setup. Moving on to the back here. Miraculously, somehow this thing still has the original Strat buttons on it. I don't know how, but it does. Usually that's the first thing to go on these guys. And here's what I was talking about earlier, how if you were to just look into this electronics control cavity, you could probably fool somebody by saying, yeah, it's all original, because I'm pretty sure that is the factory wiring and solder jobs on everything. Again, it was just the splicing jobs within the pickup cavities that would give it away as not being original. So moving on there, we go to the back of the neck. It's kind of a nice rounded shape. You can see there's kind of an impression mark right here. And up here we find our serial number. So that dates it to 1985, 106th day of the year, 546th in production, so it's a Nashville-made guitar. Kalamazoo shut down in 84, so that gives it to you. Custom shop edition stamp, as we were talking about, just means it was a limited edition. And another thing the seller didn't tell me when I bought this one, factory second, SEC. That just meant it had a small finish blemish somewhere when it was brand new, or a factory employee wanted to purchase this one at a discount. But pretty much the worst thing about a factory second is the second stamp itself. This example weighs 7 pounds, 9.6 ounces. Let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. One more thing before the playing demo. Now I know why somebody swapped out this bridge pickup. It's microphonic, so it will squeal on you under really high gain. It depends on what amp you have. Some people actually prefer the sound of microphonic pickups. My job's just to tell you about it. So here's an example. Basically, just keep strumming and you'll be fine. Thankfully, the neck pickup I bought, though, isn't. So what are my final thoughts on the Explorer XPL? These are kind of a niche market item. Not everybody's going to want to rush out and buy one of these, but if you're like in an 80s hair metal tribute band or something like that, I mean, is there really anything cooler than this? I mean, it's a little bit freaky looking. We're going to ask you, what is that guitar? Is it actually a real Gibson? And I think that's where the collectability factor comes for this model to me, because I like the freaky stuff that Gibson did, especially when I can find the rarer stop-tail versions. So it's not for everybody, but if you see one for a good enough of a price, I mean, there's nothing to fear about these guys. They're actually pretty cool. So if you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this one, I'll put a link in the description that will take you to the Reverb for sale page, but let's go ahead and review the condition. This one is definitely a road dog. It's not something that's a mint condition collectible. I wouldn't really even call it collector's grade, but it's not, you know, so beat up that it's only player's grade either. But you've got lots of scratches on the face of the headstock. You've got some chipping to the lacquer along the tuners. That's pretty common on these. It's not too bad. I mean, I could touch all these little finish breaks up for you if you want, but I just thought, you know, a guitar that looks like this, I think it looks good with a little bit of wear. The ebony fretboard was just cleaned and conditioned. The frets were polished up. You do have flattening fret wear on like the first 4 or 5 frets. It wasn't anything that I noticed really affected play at this point in time, but definitely good to know about. And moving on to the body here, the neck pickup is an era correct replacement. I was told it was an 83 Flying V. The bridge pickup is supposed to be the one that was originally put in this guitar, but the pickups have been in and out and they've been spliced back into the circuit. Now, there's tons of nicks and dings all over this guitar. I can't really take the time to point out each and every single one, but I think you could see them right here pretty easily. So the whole top of the guitar is just littered with those things. This was somebody's gigging workhorse. The knobs have definitely been replaced, and the more and more I look at the bridge, I'm questioning if that's even original to the guitar. I mean, the ABR1 itself is original, but this almost looks more nickel than the rest of the hardware, looking more like it's chrome. However, that just could be an aging thing. Or maybe it's the other way around. The tailpiece is the one that's been replaced and that's chrome instead of nickel. Well, once you start looking at it, you start to see those slight differences. So I do want you to be aware of that. Moving on to the back side of the headstock. Again, it is a factory second. You've got the Custom Shop Edition decal and your serial number. Now there's lots of edge wear to the top of the headstock. I mean, no breaks, cracks, or repairs, thankfully, but definitely finish wear. Now the neck, despite the readings making it look a little bit chunky, it's very thin feeling and flat. I mean, it's kind of a shreddery guitar in that aspect, but it's still rounded. So I would classify it as a 60s neck, but it's got just a little bit of meat to it, but not a lot. Moving on to the back, you've got some buckle worming and scratches, a few nicks through the finish kind of by the control plate here. And as always with these pointy guitars, as you can see once we go around the edges, there's a lot of finish wear, especially at the very edge. So if condition is important to you at all, skip on this example, but these things are hard to find mint condition, especially with a stop tail. No breaks, cracks, or repairs. That's all that I was really worried about with this model. So let's go ahead and take a look at it under Blacklight. There we go. Now you guys can see this thing has definitely been used. So this is all that sweat absorption. I mean, somebody, however they played it, they were pretty sweaty. But nothing too out of the ordinary here on the top. We'll go up here, take a look at our headstock. Everything's looking good here. Take a quick look around the edges. This will kind of help you guys see those finish missing areas. Now the back of the headstock and the neck will glow a little bit more just because once again the sweat has absorbed into it. I mean, this guy played pretty much all over the place, but thankfully the finish isn't worn off the neck or anything. You definitely have some light impressions, some nicks and dings here and there, the typical line going up the side where the fretboard ends and the neck begins. But yeah, this thing Blacklight's exactly the way I was expecting. Sometimes a surprise or two is fun, but I've had enough surprises with this guitar to, get it back into what I consider saleable condition. So there's that edge wear again. And there. Cool. This instrument still retains its original Gibson case. The handle has been replaced. Once you open it up, you can kind of see their modifications there with those big bolts in there. I don't think you'll ever have to worry about this one falling off. That's on there pretty darn good. Now the latches on these, they're a little bit loose, but they function. I just want you to know that they're not like the best latches in the world. I was a little bit taken back by them at first. But it was definitely used. Tolex rips and tears all over. Scratches, scuffs. It looks like you had stickers on here at one point in time. Your Gibson logo is still there though. And the case lid just flops over. It's propped up against my wall. You've got some staining up there. Almost looks like there was a sticker of a mustache or something. Maybe a big pair of lips. I don't know. But these are kind of funny little cases. They've got a place for like your strap and stuff. And then you also have a little compartment lid in here for like, I don't know, a pedal tuner or something. But these are specially formed to the XPL body shape. Despite being form-fitted, they're not like super tight or anything. The guitar still moves around a little bit. Side to side it's pretty good, but up and down, I'll put a little bit of extra padding right here. So, if you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson XPL, you can check out that link in the description that will take you to the Reverb for Sale page. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in today, and we will see you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.